G'day everyone, and welcome back to the Big Bros podcast. My name is Jeremy. Welcome if it's your first time joining us on the show. I'm joined by my lovely friend and co-host Ilan, but most importantly, we're joined today by Danny Kennedy. How you going, mate?
Fellas, I'm very, very good. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate you having me on.
Mate, great to have you on the show. And look, DK, I've personally been engrossed in your content since a young 17-year-old in school and now sitting here as a 25-year-old. I can safely say, you've been a personal inspiration of mine with your content. And for the reason of always being a curious thinker, I feel like you've always been a curious thinker. You've always been so great with your fitness content, your lifestyle content, but your relatability with your curiosity for life has always been such a draw factor for me personally. And with that, have you always been a curious thinker, and where did this stem from?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say early on, I probably wasn't. It was probably the exact opposite to an extent. I've mentioned it in podcasts before. I was very much so like people pleaser, kind of just did whatever I could to fit in, to be honest. And that wasn't authentic, and that obviously leads to a lot of resistance, anxiousness, all of that type of stuff. And it was probably at the end of year 12, I'd say it was, where I just had this, I don't know what it was. I kind of just had this moment where I was kind of like, fuck it, I just don't really care anymore. And, I just had this period of time where I was like, this is not it, and I just started to lean into more of the things that actually felt aligned and did the things that I wanted to do. And more importantly, let go of caring about other people's opinions of me. And that was such a liberating feeling. And I kind of went from one end of the spectrum to the other. A year or so later, I finished up basketball, and within 6 months, I did my first bodybuilding competition. And so to go from one extreme to the other, like literally caring about every single thing that I did and what people would think of it, to then going out and doing this thing that no one in my circle had ever done, and probably no one in my circle even knew that I was interested in, was just such like a liberating and freeing thing to do, to realize that a lot of, and as I speak about with my clients now, like a lot of the limiting beliefs I had were exactly that. They weren't real. They were a belief that I had bought into. And, I say all the time, regardless of whether your beliefs are true or not, if you believe it, your experience of it will always be 100% true. And so seeing the alternative or the opposite of that was just this feeling that I just couldn't go back to the old way, right? And from that point onwards, I really started to lean into the things that actually felt good and felt aligned. And particularly through my content, ever since day one, I wanted to make it relatable. And it's not like I was intentionally posting stuff to see if people could relate. It was just like I wanted to almost make my social media and my content an extension of myself. And I think that's why it is so relatable. I didn't want to make it this highlight reel. And of course, the things that go well, I kind of share those. But at the same time, the things that don't go well, that's where you grow. That's where you get all your lessons, and that's where you improve. And that's what leads you to the next journey or the next opportunity or the next challenge. And so I just wanted to be able to relay that through my content. And I've said a lot on my own podcast and other podcasts as well. Like I've always gone into business and particularly with content, whether it be podcasts, socials, email, YouTube, whatever, really trying to document my experience and not create content. And I think that's why it has been so relatable, is because it's just literally been almost like, in a sense, me making a documentary about my own life just through my content daily. And at the same time, I looked at it and just thought, like, the stuff that I related to was things that I could see myself in that content, or I could kind of place myself in that person's shoes or in their story, because I could relate. And the people that didn't, I just couldn't relate to it, and it didn't really have any effect on me. And so I just thought, what better way to hopefully have as much impact as possible? What better way to do that than just to share all the experiences and put myself out there and continue to try and challenge myself to grow. And you don't grow when you're comfortable, right? And so that's gonna lead to a lot of curiosity. It's going to lead to a lot of setbacks and failures, if that's how you look at them. But more importantly, it very quickly puts you in the pathway of where you want to go a lot quicker than just sitting here and fucking talking about it or thinking about it for a long time and procrastinating. It's like, when you're taking consistent action, regardless of whether it's the right choice or the wrong choice, you're going to find out pretty fucking quickly whether it was right or wrong. And then you're going to have the clarity on what the right direction is and what does and doesn't work. And so it's just very much so being an extension of my own journey. And so whether it be content or business, I think it's almost just been a mirror of that. You know, whether it be obviously the fitness space very heavily for a long period of time, but over the last 4 or 5 years, I've done a lot of work on myself and discovered personal development and the benefits and the growth that I've experienced from doing that inner work. And so I just relay that to, through my content so people can come along with that journey as well. And, I've never really kind of aimed to tell people what to do. It's more so like, here's what I did. This is what I took away from it, and do whatever the fuck you want with it.
That's awesome, mate. Look, one thing I've definitely observed in your content is you're not afraid to tap into vulnerability. You're not afraid to tap and showcase your lowlights as well as your highlights to give a really kind of
Mm.
comprehensive picture of who you are everywhere. And I'm just curious to know, like, what role does vulnerability play in your life?
I genuinely think it's one of our biggest superpowers, right? It's and there's different levels of vulnerability too, or different types of vulnerability, which I've probably understood more over the last few years. Like the most obvious one is what most people would look at, of you sharing the things about yourself or about your life that are you may be insecure about or uncomfortable, or the things that didn't go well. But in a sense, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that, again, I think that is a superpower, and by avoiding it, all you're doing is suppressing it, or it's not going anywhere, right? It just continues to grow and grow and grow. You just can't see it. It's kind of like a fucking iceberg, right? It's under there. You just can't see it, but eventually it's going to show its head. But what I've really learned is that vulnerability works both ways. I think something that a lot of people probably don't even realize they struggle with is vulnerability when things are going really well, right?
Mhm.
And so even being able to be open and vulnerable enough to share when shit's going really well, right? Instead of thinking, oh, well, is this going to make me look too egotistical? Like, is me sharing things going well, is that going to result in things going bad and self-sabotage and all this type of stuff? But it's being able to open up, and that kind of is in perfect alignment with the whole not really giving a shit what anyone thinks, in a sense. And I think even with that, like, I genuinely believe I don't really care what people think, but everyone does to an extent, right? Like, and I think it is probably important for you to genuinely care about what certain people think. For me, it's just like, if I wouldn't go to someone for advice, then I just couldn't really give a fuck about what their opinion is. But the vulnerability side, I just think it's extremely powerful. I think I probably learnt the most about it after consuming a lot of Brené Brown's content. I thought her stuff was really, really good. But even just being able to pick up on patterns, like anytime that I have been vulnerable, whether it's relaying it through content or whether it's even just to myself, like most people aren't vulnerable to themselves, let alone the external side of themselves, or the people around them. But when I've been open and vulnerable, that is what leads to growth, right? Outside of that, you just suppress, and you're being avoidant to the things that aren't going anywhere, and they are those things. Like, the things that you are vulnerable about is what I refer to a lot as your ticket for growth. Like, that is how you continue to evolve and grow. And so when you can start to look at it more so as an opportunity and not a problem, or like a negative thing, it's like, okay, well, there is a reason why this is showing up, or there is a reason why this feels uncomfortable. And how am I going to be ready for the next level of life or the next level of growth if I can't even navigate through this? When you set your desire or your intention, you've put in your order with the universe, and the universe always delivers. The problem is the way that it delivers often is disguised as a problem or a negative thing. And so when we just continue to react and make the same choices that we always have because it's uncomfortable or it's not how we thought it was going to be, then I was explaining to a client before, it's like I don't even play PlayStation, but I obviously have. But it's like in a PlayStation game, right, or Xbox or whatever. To get to the next level, you have to pass the mission. And if you fail the mission, you go back to the start, and you keep staying in that same level until you pass the mission. And there's a reason why you can't go to the end level right from day one. It's because you're not ready for it yet, right? You're getting thrown into this deep end where you're not ready for it. You don't have the tools to handle that. And I genuinely believe that the universe always has your back. And so you may look at this thing and go, fuck, why me? Or like play the victim, or be disappointed, or just give up. But it's like, this was put in front of you for a reason. And until you understand or learn how to navigate through this, you aren't ready for the next level, right? And so the universe is doing you a favor. And to be able to move through those things, it requires vulnerability. Right? Otherwise, you're just avoidant to it and you stay exactly where you are. And that is comfortable. Right. And that's the problem. Like, it is comfortable, even if it's a shit scenario or a shit experience. Like, it's still comfortable and safe because it's familiar and it's known. And so the only way things change, I often refer to it like the gym. If you go to the gym and do the same exercise with the same weight, same reps over and over and over again, after a very short period of time, your body's not going to change because there's no reason for it to change. The only way it changes is when you provide it with some form of stimulus that it has to adapt and change and grow.
And you speak a lot about time horizons as well. You know, there's so much about not being able to progress to that next level in the game, the next level on in the gym, in the PlayStation game, in life, whatever it is, all about, you know, time horizons. And it's hard because we are in such a world where we have so much urgency, right? We have so much urgency to want everything now. Patience always takes a back seat. We're told by a million and one different channels on Instagram that we should be doing X, Y, and Z as part of our morning routine every morning. But then we should also have moments of gratitude and calmness. So it's that tango between, you know, needing to go out there and chase everything right now, but then also to stop and reflect. And it's really hard to get, you know, that perfect, being a buzzword, balance of the two with a time horizon in mind. And, you know, coming from a sporting background yourself and a fitness coach, oftentimes you would have to talk to people about goal setting, right? And have goal setting for yourself. So when we come to goal setting, I know I've always been taught the whole SMART goals method. You know, when it comes to SMART goals, there's an element in the SMART goals that has a timeline. Do you believe in that?
Look, I do. I think there's a differentiation between the two, though, right? I think when we're talking, say, intentions, manifestations, whatever it is that we're trying to attract into our life, there's aspects of that are time sensitive, and I think for some people it can be a massive strength or a massive driving factor as to how and why they actually implement it when there is a time frame on it. And as you said, coming from sporting background, physical fitness, all the rest of that stuff, like, you get taught so often that there are time frames. At the same time, those time frames tend to be the driving factor that creates the overwhelm, that creates the stress, that creates the bad decisions, that creates a disappointment when shit doesn't happen straight away. And so there is this fine line. There's a bit of a balance. I think certain aspects of goals in particular should have time frames, right? Like, if I'm sitting here saying, I want to achieve this level of body fat percentage, you know, if that's my goal every fucking year, then maybe I should put a time frame on it, because I'm just you haven't given yourself the accountability as to why, or like when you decide to not follow through with what you said you were going to do, there is no consequence because there was no time frame on it. But at the same time, even with that example, it's like the time frame is always longer than you expect. And you hear this all the time with business, with body composition. Even when I used to compete, like, I would give myself way more time than what I needed to get in condition to compete, because it allows for room for shit to go wrong. You know, it allows for not only for shit to go wrong, but it takes away the overwhelm and the forcing and controlling nature of trying to get the outcome, because you're ready ahead of time, right? But as I said before, it's kind of a double-edged sword sometimes, because when I look at some of the biggest areas of resistance that I've had, particularly in business in particular, they've come from timeframes. Or overwhelm usually comes from a time frame that, I'm not even going to say unrealistic. Sometimes it is realistic, but that time frame is creating the overwhelm. Even just on a day-to-day basis, I think when we almost detach from time sometimes, and if we bring it back even a level further, particularly with certain feelings, right? Like, the only reason we want anything is because of how you think you'll feel when you've got it, majority of the time. Now, again, I'm not saying that there should never be time frames, because they are important sometimes. But if your focus, particularly with an intention or how you want your life to look or what you want to attract into your life, if your focus shifts from, okay, well, I'm here, goals here, it's going to take this long to get there, and I'm just going to follow this strategy, do these things, create this resistance to try and get to this outcome. The first step should always be, how can I feel that way now? Right. And there's a few reasons why. Because one, now the time frame doesn't really matter as much, because you're not forcing and controlling, you're not consistently coming back to check to see what you did if it worked, right? That's half the problem, is that like we do something and then expect to see an outcome straight away. And when you don't see it, all of a sudden you're stressed, you're changing paths, you're fucking giving up, whatever it may be. But if your focus is like, okay, well, why do I want this? Like, why do I want a podcast that's listened to X amount of people per month? Because I want to add value, right? Okay, why do I want to add value? I want to feel this sense of accomplishment. I want to feel gratitude for people listening. I want to feel purpose, whatever it is. Every single one of those emotions can be felt before you've got this podcast that does really well, right? But when you're able to feel those things first, right, and you're embodying all of those qualities, you're embodying those emotions, and it's something that you're intentional about, now it makes sense for you to start attracting all these outcomes. Now it makes sense for you to attract more of that feeling. And this is what I talk about with my clients in terms of the importance of the state we're in, right? And the importance of not waiting for something in order for you to change, or waiting for something in order for you to feel that way, because more often than not, you're going to get to that point and realize you're the same person and you feel the same way. And it didn't bring you the feeling that you expected. And so now if like the focus is on, all right, well, I want to feel this way. How can I feel that way now? A few things come from that. The first one is that your ability to attract whatever outcome it is a fuckload easier. You know, you're a vibrational match to it. If it happened to fall in your lap, it'd feel normal. You would be ready to receive it. But secondly, you feel like you don't feel like you need to control the outcomes anymore, right? All of a sudden, it doesn't fucking matter when it happens. And just like practically everything in life, when you don't feel like you need it, it's so much easier to attract it. And you can think of a million examples of something that you've worked at for a long period of time to achieve or to attain. And you may have forced and controlled your way there. And once you're there and you don't really care about it anymore, it's so much easier to replicate and get again and again and again and again. And so there's things you can take from that, right? Detachment being one of them. Like when you detach from this outcome, you still have this really strong desire to achieve it or to attract it, but you're not sitting here going like, when's it going to happen? Or how much longer? Or what do I need to do next? Or why has it not happened yet? It's like, well, if I focused on being the person that would have it, makes sense that I'm going to receive it now. But at the same time, I'm not saying I'm going to wait fucking 12 weeks to feel good about myself because I'm waiting until I get abs to feel good. I'm not saying that in 5 years' time, when my business is doing X, Y, and Z, that's when I'll feel like I've made it. And that's when I'm going to feel confident. And that's when I'm going to go out and do all the shit that I want to do. Right. And so I think, again, very long-winded answer, but if we tie it all the way back in, what that thought process leads to with these time frames is waiting, right? Whether it's this time of the year, people have just started all these goals that they probably fucking knew they wanted 6 months ago, and they wait till January to do it. Or, even, you're a successful CEO who's making all the money in the world. They're waiting until they retire to go out and travel the world and do all the shit they want to do. They might not make it to that age, and even if they do, like they've just not wasted, but there's this huge chunk of their life that's gone and you're not going to get back. And you have this realization that I could have been doing this shit the whole time. I could have done both. I could have went and experienced all of these things, but I prolonged it for what? Bob Proctor used this example in this video that I watched of him a while back about an hourglass. And when you look at an hourglass, or if we imagine hourglass is our life, you look at how much sand is in the top, and all three of us are quite young. You look at the sand in the top and it looks like there's heaps left, right? That's one part of it. But majority of people spend all their time fixated on the sand in the bottom that you cannot get back. But second to that, the sand in the top, no matter how much it looks like there is, you don't know when it's done. He used this example in this video of one of his best friends growing up. I think he said he was maybe 20 or 21, and they'd started this business together, and they had all these plans to conquer the world together. And after one of their events, his friend left, and on his way home crashed his car and passed away. And if he had have asked him how much sand he had left before he left the event, he would have said plenty, right? But you just don't know. And so knowing that, I used this analogy the other day. It'd be like going on a holiday to like your favorite location you've always wanted to go to, and just sitting in the room until the last day, and then going out and doing all the shit that you've always wanted to do. You've been there for like 2-3 weeks and you wait until the last day to do it. Why?
It's funny. Tony Robbins says we overestimate how much we can achieve in 1 year and underestimate how much we can achieve in 10 years. But I think sometimes we attribute what we want to do later, as you were just saying, A part of what you were saying as well is like changing that radio frequency, because I think when it comes to frequency and, setting that intention that we want in the world, in order to receive it, you got to be on the same radio station as the universe, right? You can't
Yep.
be on 92.1 and the universe be on 101.9. You've got to be aligned in that respect. And part of that is also being detached. So, and I know you've spoken a little bit about like high frequency versus low frequency behaviors. I guess for you, what's been one of those high frequency activities or behaviors that you've done that you have seen really elevate your personal growth?
Mm. Yeah, it's a good question, and I think there's multiple answers to this. But even if we quickly come back to what you were saying before around like a lot of people understand like, okay, if I already was this person, what would that look like? But the challenge and the opportunity for this serious amount of growth and a quantum leap or whatever you want to refer to it as is that the universe is always catching up to who we're being, right? Not what we're doing, but who we're being. And so for majority of people, who they're being is just a reaction to what's in front of them. Right. And so if we use a podcast example, if I have 500 people a month listening to my podcast and that's how I feel about the podcast in terms of where it's at, then everything I'm doing is a reaction to having 500 people listen to the podcast. But if I said to myself, all right, well, the intention is to have 1 million people listening to the podcast every month, and I showed up to everything I did about that podcast as if there already was 1 million people listening. But the hard part or the challenging or the opportunity of this is that it's not going to fucking feel like you should be doing that at the start, right? Because it's almost delusion. You're looking at this thing and you're acting up here. And it's like, well, like if we use weight loss or fat loss, someone who needs to lose 20 kilos on day one, looking at themselves in the mirror and just thinking, I'm proud of myself. I'm confident in my body. I'm so happy with the fact that I, have invested in myself and that I feel good about myself. Meanwhile, they haven't changed a bit. They haven't even lost a gram. But if they show up each day responding the way that they would if they were where they want to be, then reality is always catching up. It's always catching up to us. And the reason why people's lives tend to look the same is because they're always just reacting to what's in front of them. And so reality's already caught up and there is nothing for it to catch up to. And so coming back to your question around like the frequency side of things, I feel like there's a few ways to look at it. If we take lessons from when we're in our highest frequency, it's when we're not thinking, right? Like in almost every scenario, when you're having an amazing time with your friend or with your partner or whatever, you're not thinking about anything. When you go for a run and you get the runner's high, it's because you're not thinking about all your problems. When you're in a meditation and you dip into that meditative state where you lose track of space and time, you're not thinking about anything. Ice bath, you're not thinking about fucking anything because you can't, because it's so fucking cold and you've got that shock and whatever else. And so you can take shit away from all of these things. Okay, when I'm not thinking, I am in my natural state, which is high frequency. I had Peter Crone on the podcast a year or so ago, and he talked about psychological time, right? Like psychological time is what creates majority of our negative emotions. Psychologically living in the past creates a feeling of whatever, frustration, anger, depression, the list goes on. Psychologically living in a future that hasn't happened yet, may not happen and probably won't happen, is going to create anxiety, stress, all of these worries. And if we removed that thinking about either the past or the future, there's not one reason why we should feel any of those emotions, right? Majority of the time. And so I think when it comes to like what has allowed me to be in this high frequency, it can be a number of things, like utilizing a lot of those tools I mentioned before. Like there's no one size fits all when it comes to morning routines and shit like that, but it's like what works for you. Like for me, that's cold shower straight out of bed, meditation and intentions. And I feel like I've tapped into the frequency and the feelings that I need to tap into for it to be normal for my thing that I'm trying to attract to fall into place. I always ask myself this question, like if it fell in my lap today, would it be normal? Would it feel normal? And if it wouldn't feel normal, that's okay. It just means that you're not ready for it yet. Right. And we see this, a good example of that would be someone who wins Tats Lotto. There's a huge percentage of people who win the jackpot in Tats Lotto that after a year or 2 or 3 have lost all their money. And it's because nothing about them and their life suggests that nothing about it is normal for them to have this significant amount of money. Like it doesn't match their values. It doesn't match their work ethic. It doesn't match their money beliefs. It doesn't match their network. It doesn't match fucking anything. And so we'll always revert to normal. And so part of the the challenge or the opportunity is how can I normalize something that doesn't feel normal yet? And this is where, the law of exposure is really powerful too. It's like exposing yourself to things that aren't normal until they feel normal, even if you don't have it yet, or even if it's not part of your life yet. And I've seen so much growth and success because of that. Like putting myself in environments or around certain people or in positions where it's so far from normal, but doing it consistently until all of a sudden it's like, oh, this may not be my life yet, but it feels normal. It doesn't feel like it did when I first did it. And so I think it's really just dialing in the whole embodiment piece. And that's where the frequency comes from. We look at high frequency, and the way that I've always or often explained it is almost just like feeling good or feeling shit. But lately, like particularly over the last 6 to 12 months, I've also kind of understood that part of that is not just the feeling good bit. It's the embodiment bit. So when I am feeling shit, how am I in that moment? How do I just instantly let go of all the things that I was embodying before because I feel shit, and then I'll get back to them when I feel good again? Or do I still embody the same qualities of that version of me when I'm in that spot? And so I think it's just being mindful of who am I being? Like that's the real key. It's not what am I doing? It's who am I being through every moment, and am I dipping in and out of it? And that's something that can, is challenging, and is where the growth happens. Like it's not going to happen straight away. Like there's still days where I dip out of it all the time. Like Monday this week was perfect example. I dip back into a lot of old beliefs and old reactions, and allowed this external stress to consume me to the point where I did dip out of that frequency. But it's the ability to then pick up on that. And then instead of that lasting a week or a month, it's like, okay, it might last an hour or two. And you go, fuck, all right. I'm just reacting the same way that I have in the past. And so until I start responding intentionally in a way that is in alignment with who I'm saying I want to be, there's no reason for things to change.
A big theme of what I've thought about coming into this year, and started to think about going towards the end of last year, was that whole concept of resilience. And I think that's been a big part of my train of thought recently, because Ilan and I are now in a position where we are entering that third year of our podcast, something that we are bloody passionate about. But, it's not at the stage where, you're seeing those results of what you might have hoped for it to be. But like you said, you got to embody it, and you got to embody your intention behind it, and really believe in yourselves, which, credit to us, I think we really fucking do, and why we're so passionate about this. But with resilience, it also made me think, is it enough to just be resilient about something? Because in my opinion, upon reflecting about it, it's probably not. I don't think resilience can exist on its own, because then you're not going to do the thing right. I think you have to have that element of love and resilience. But something I've thought about is, well, how long does the two of those go together for you to keep on going? Does it ever reach a stage of one dipping down and that's enough for you to reach that obstacle and call it quits there? Or if you have resilience and you have love for as long a period of time, you will eventually get that embodiment of what you've been striving to achieve. And I think that leads me into asking about, your own personal journey with this. I mean, you've been doing a podcast since 2016. You've hustled like, nobody else that I know of when it comes to this. So was it a matter of resilience and love for you, or was there another secret component that you put into the mixture?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. And I'll just say as well, like, you guys should be proud of yourselves, right? Because you're already in the fucking 1% of podcasts. Like I can't remember the exact stat, but it's something along the lines of like 90 something percent of podcasts don't make it past episode 10 or 7 or something like that. And so being able to remain consistent with it is a huge win. And this is where, when I look at it in a few different ways. There's this analogy that I heard from a mentor of mine that I now just fucking recycle over and over and over again. It's like being on the outside of a dam wall, right? Like a dam full of water. And when you're on the outside of the wall, you can't see anything. You might be making daily deposits of water into this dam or whatever. And it's going to look like fuck all's happening because you're on the outside, but you have no idea where that level of water is. And so by continuing to just compound those daily or weekly or monthly efforts, however you want to look at it, at any stage, that water can overflow or break through the damn wall. And you know, it's like that little the meme or the little picture that's going around the internet of the two guys digging underground, and one of them stops and the other one is, and they're both this far away from the gold. And so I think it's, you mentioned the love piece too. I think it does have to align. Like if something feels heavy right from the start, then the likelihood of you being resilient with it, or even it being something that comes to fruition, is pretty unlikely, because of the fact that it's not even what you want. Right. And so this is a few, yeah, there's been a number of times throughout you know, my life, and particularly in business, where I've had these moments where I have just been pushing and continuing to remain consistent and being resilient. But it got to this point where it was a realization that it was no longer aligned. Right. It was no longer something that I even wanted, but I'd been doing it for so long that it just felt like I needed to keep going, because I was like, oh, well, it's just a waste if I stop this now. And so I think it's also making sure that it is something that feels good. And you know, you can ask yourself that question, like, okay, is this something that I feel like I'm passionate about? And would I do this for free? And I wouldn't recommend everyone just doing shit for free their whole life, obviously, but it's a good question to ask yourself, because if you wouldn't do it for free, then like the intention's probably a little wrong from the beginning. But if I look at it, you know, the podcast is a great example. And I believe I you know, adopted this resilience or whatever from basketball growing up, like just, you know, having so many setbacks and failures and being told you're not good enough, and just continually striving to, you know, and that was probably one of the examples of what I'm talking about. I got to a point where it was no longer for the right reasons. It was almost like just to fucking prove everyone wrong. But at the same time, there was so much I took away from that. And so around the time where I started the podcast, I started listening to the rapper Russ. And Russ has become one of my favorite artists like over the years. I don't know if you guys have heard his music before, but he tells his story about before he blew up, right? He's this independent artist, rapper. He produces, mixes, masters all his own songs, writes them all, and owns the rights to all of his shit. And he was putting out a song a week on SoundCloud every single week for like 3 years, every single week. And fuck all people were listening. But his mindset around it was like, I'm passionate about this. I know that this is good and it's getting better the more I do it. And eventually, when people start to find my music, there's going to be so much for them to come back and listen to. They're going to be able to see my journey, but there's also enough for them to become a fan for life. And so that's what I adopted with the podcast. I was like, I enjoy this. Like I enjoy being able to have conversations with people, like regardless of whether anyone's listened to my podcast at all. Like I've still taken so much away from the podcast, from the connections and the relationships I've been able to build from it, that regardless of whether anyone listened or not, I'd probably still do it. Right. But I just knew that as long as I continued to improve, which is going to happen with repetition, and as long as I added value every single episode, even when no one's listening, when people do eventually listen, there is just a gold mine there for people to come back to, and they are going to become a subscriber. Like I was so confident in the fact that what I was offering is what people could take value from, that it wasn't even a question of like, how long should I do this for until I stop because no one's listening. It was just like 99% of people are going to stop. And if I maintain my consistency and resilience with this, and it is something that feels aligned and it does, you know, it's something that I continue to work on, fuck, I can't lose this shit. There's no way I can fucking lose. There's no way that this is not going to work as long as I remain consistent with it. And so, you know, even knowing what I know now around all the stuff we're chatting about today, like that would have amplified my ability to really lean into that trust and belief, you know. And I think that's a big part of it, is if it's something that you know that you want, and it maintains that level of, you maintain the level of desire throughout it, you have to have the trust and belief. Trust and belief have to be unconditional. There cannot be conditions to trust and belief. Otherwise, it's not trust or belief. Like literally by definition, it can't be fucking trust or belief if there's conditions to it. And so that is one of the main ingredients of attracting any outcome. You have to have that level of trust and belief, that deep, unwavering level of trust and belief, as if you fucking know that everything is working for you and you don't have to know when it's going to happen. Right. And the way that I looked at it, particularly for the podcast as an example, was even with certain guests, like there's been, this is probably a good example of resilience. Like, I've had so many guests on my show that were acquired over 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 or 6 years of me reaching out to this guest, following up every 3 to 6 months nonstop for 5 years. In some cases, there was one that was 6 years. And so my approach with it was, firstly, there was no attachment to what they said. I wasn't taking it personal, none of that shit. It was like, okay, the way that I looked at it is that if it's a no, then I'm just not, I can't offer enough value yet. My show is not at the level that would, like, make them want to do my show. And so it's not a them problem, it's a me problem, or it's a me opportunity. It's like, okay, well, back to the drawing board, continue to improve. And it's inevitable that once I get to the point where I can offer enough value, it's going to be a yes. And that's exactly what's happened. Even to this day, there's still so many guests that I reach out to that either no response or a no. But, that's fine. Like, it makes sense. If I can't offer them enough yet for them to say yes, and that's okay. But it allows me to come back and continue to improve and continue to build my business and my audience and the value that I can offer, to the point where it's fucking undeniable. Like, they can't say no.
It's so true. I think something that's really sitting with me is the whole idea that if it didn't feel normal to receive it now, then chances are you probably weren't ready to receive it currently anyway. And I'm curious to know, when you started the podcast in 2016, 17, or even more broadly, when you started doing the content, if I was to ask you at that time, did you start embodying all the things that you're thinking about now, all the values that you have now? Is that something that just kind of gradually grew?
I think in terms of the resilience, consistency, and all that type of stuff, that was well and truly, already instilled in me by then. And again, like, it's all just this evolution, right? Like, yes, there's so much shit that I know now that would have been handy to know back then, but I didn't, right? And so without those little periods, I probably wouldn't have gotten to this period where I even want to learn about this type of stuff. And so, even just the example you gave just then, I'm so fucking glad that half of these guests didn't say yes when I first asked them, because, like, even I'm trying to think of a way to put this, like, certain scenarios where it doesn't work out, as I said before, you have to trust that's happening for you, right? A good example would be, fuck, I don't know. It's obviously worked out pretty well for him, but look at Justin Bieber, right? There's a period of time where his life was a fucking shit show because he was not ready for that. Now imagine what artist he would be today. And I don't know whether he'd be fucking better or worse or whatever, but imagine a possibility of where his music career would be right now, or how active he would be as a musician if that had have happened 5 years later or 10 years later. And so you got to look at it sometimes and go, okay, this is a massive blessing, because if I had have made it now, or if this had have happened now and I wasn't ready for it, that could be the end. Or that could be the thing that turns me away from this forever. Or I've just missed out on someone's huge audience who's listened to my show and just gone, that's dog shit, I'm not listening to that ever again. And as your show grows, you've just lost fans for life, or you've lost subscribers for life, not fans, but subscribers for life, right? So it's not about whether or not it goes the way you want it to go. Like, I was talking about this with someone the other day. It's fucking wild to think, when you say it out loud, that like me, like, or you know how everything should go. It's like, says fucking who? It's like, out of everyone in the world, it's like, I'm the one who knows how shit should go. And if it doesn't go my way, then everything else is wrong and not me. It's like, nah, it doesn't work like that.
If there was one lesson that you could tell, 10-year-old Danny, or 11-year-old or 12-year-old Danny, what would it be?
Oh, shit. I mean, at that age, I genuinely, probably not even that early, but probably between the ages of, say, 13, 14, all the way through to 18, there was plenty of great stuff. Don't get me wrong. Like, no, at no point was my life shit by any means, not at all. But a lot of my own, the meanings that I had put to a lot of things, or the way that I was going about my life, created a bit of a shitstorm in terms of like how I felt. Like, I just didn't like, I fucking hated school, hated that whole period, but it was because of me, not because of anyone else. It was because of the way that I was interpreting shit that was going on, or the way that the things that I was adopting, in particular, like people pleasing, and just trying to fit in, and also like the way that I thought my life needed to be in order for it to be good, if that makes any sense as well. And so I think whether it's, that age or even a little bit older, like I would probably look at it and just, I would look at it and say that, like, you don't have to have anything figured out, right? Like, there is no just step by step by step, you should be here and this is how life gets good. If even a conversation that I had with a good friend of mine today, we were talking about this type of stuff, and we were talking through some limiting belief stuff that we're both navigating through at the moment. And I was talking about mine, and his response was awesome. He was like, everything that we're doing is consistently building. Even if what is in front of us right now looks like what we're doing is not working, it's just laying down that foundation, right? The foundation is there. And even if you're sitting there going, like, I just feel like I'm spinning the wheels here, all of those things that you're doing and all the growth and all the experience you're having throughout that period of time are essential building blocks for later down the track when everything does fall into place. And so I mentioned earlier in the chat, quantum leap. This is like, understanding what a quantum leap is has been awesome for me, because it's just that understanding that you can feel like you're just going, like, progress is literally just going like this, like a fucking snail, right? And then out of nowhere, it just goes like this. But it does not go like this without this bit. And so when shit feels like nothing's happening and it feels like it should be going faster than this, or you fall into that comparison of comparing where you're at compared to someone else and the work they've done and where they're at in comparison to the work you've done and where you're at, none of that matters. None of it is relevant at all. And so I think what helps with that is the timeline thing, right? It's looking at it and going, okay, like, I could be working at this thing for 5 years, right? And trying to stay in this embodiment of responding the way that I feel like I should be. And I could be at this for 5 years and it feels like nothing is happening, or it's happening at a really, really slow rate. But those 5 years have created the foundation which allows it in year 6 to just go like this. And it doesn't even make sense how it's gone that quick. But it never ends up here without this bit. And so again, I feel like I've just somehow managed to not answer the question, but I would tell myself that, like, just remove all the pressure. Like, I put so much pressure on myself with everything, particularly with sport, with business, with fucking everything. I put so much pressure on myself that was just not necessary, because it didn't mean anything. Like, there was no pressure apart from the pressure I was putting on myself, which then results in a lot of these shit emotions and feelings and low frequency. And it's just this little vicious cycle, because when you're in that low frequency, you start attracting more shit that's in alignment with that. And so now it's just this cycle, and you're consistently looking outwards for shit to change, but it's not. It's the universe is a mirror, and it's consistently showing you a reflection of who you're being and all the shit that you're doing. It's just your thoughts, actions, feelings are sending out this vibration. And so if you're doing the same things, feeling the same way, reacting to the same things, then it is going to look the same. And that was exactly what I was stuck in for a long period of time. But again, I wouldn't change it, because without that, I'm not where I am now. Without a doubt, like, without a fucking doubt, I would not have done or achieved or been able to experience a quarter of the things that I have in the last 10 to 15 years without that period of time, which sucked. So I'm fucking stoked that it sucked.
Danny, before we wrap it up, I saved a post of yours back in 2016, and you made a post that listed a lot of learnings that you would tell your younger self, and a lot of them really spoke to me. Now, one of the things you wrote on there, I feel like speaks really relevantly to what we're talking about right now, and that was, you said, stay neutral with your emotions, wins and losses. How have you been doing that in your life, and why is that important?
I fucking hope I'm answering this question properly, but it was looking at, like, frequency again, right? It was understanding that we have this baseline frequency, and we will always revert to baseline. We'll always revert to normal. And so when we're having these huge dips or spikes, and if you look at a lot of people's lives, that's what it is. It's this is low baseline frequency, and we look for the external shit that gives us the spike, and then we drop back down. So you look for the next one that gives you the spike, and it's just like this up and down all the time. Whereas when you're able to elevate that baseline frequency, or you're able to get to that point where you're not relying on the external stuff to determine how you feel, then all of a sudden these external things that happen don't really matter that much, right? And it turns into this expectation. And so, as I said, like, I probably benefit the fact that I was the opposite of that, right? I was riding this fucking wave, but in a sense, it almost desensitized me to the negative part of it. And again, like I think that's one of the biggest reasons as to why, um, although I'm not yet like where I want to be, I will be, but it desensitized me to the negative or to the failure or the setback because I'd experienced so much of it that it just got to the point where that was just like, it doesn't really affect me when shit doesn't go my way. It doesn't affect me when I have this big failure or this big setback because I'd been exposed to it so many times. And so now all of a sudden, I definitely stayed in that for a period of time. And again, that was probably that created the byproduct of life not looking the way that I wanted it to. And so it was then getting this awareness of like, okay, I get to choose what shit looks like. Right? Like I get to decide how I want my life to look. And that's largely based off who I'm being and how I'm responding and not reacting. I mean, so when you learn to respond instead of react, now you get to actually be that creator. You get to determine how shit starts to look. And it's just that detachment of letting go of judgment too. It's like, okay, this negative thing happened. It's only negative if you say it is. Right. And that's the same with everything. It just depends on what meaning you put to the things that happen. And so, okay, this bad thing that happened, like in the past, it would just send me down this little rabbit hole. Whereas now I'm like, okay, well, like, why did this happen? Or like, what's this preparing me for? And so it's almost this neutral feeling where you're not having these big spikes and drops. It's just kind of like here. And then the goal becomes, how do I elevate this? Just so this is this consistent level where when good shit happens, of course you're happy, of course you're grateful for it, but it's also not like, oh my God, I can't believe this has actually happened. It's like, I fucking expected this to happen. This is what I'm a match for. And this is what I've worked towards to the point where I almost expect it. And it's not an arrogancy at all. It's just, it's the work. It's doing the work so that becomes that level of trust and belief that when it happens, you're not sitting there so surprised because again, like all that's doing is just showing the universe that you're not ready for that either. That's not normal. If it was normal, there would barely be a reaction, And so I think it's just riding that wave and just getting really intentional about what meaning you put to these things. And, if I look back at all the worst things that ever happened, they're by far the best shit that's ever happened for me. And without those things, again, I'm not where I am now without any of them. And so it was just being able to look back in hindsight, which is very easy to do. And I think that's why it's so important for people to do this work. So you don't have to go through all that shit first, but it's in hindsight going, okay, all of those horrible moments that I felt were so horrible and that I had to go through and experience, without those, then none of the great shit that I've experienced would have happened. And so was it good or bad? Well, in this case, it was pretty fucking good.
Absolutely love that, Danny. There's no doubt that all of our listeners are going to be extracting tons of value from you. For those who are unfamiliar with your work, where is the best place for them to find you?
I'd probably say the Fitness and Lifestyle Podcast. There's plenty for you to find there. Otherwise, just Instagram at DJK Fitness, and you'll find all the rest of that stuff there. But I appreciate you guys having me on. That was a really, really good chat too. You guys are good at what you do, and I'm glad we connected. And would love to get you both on my show some stage soon.
DK, thank you so much, mate. And it was an absolute pleasure from our end. We can't wait to see what's in store for you this year. Until next time, thanks and have a great week.
Likewise, gents. Thank you.